In 1967, Charlton Comics used their newly relaunched Blue Beetle series to debut a new character created by longtime Spider-Man artist Steve Ditko via a backup story.
The story revolved around an investigative journalist named Vic Sage. Sage worked with a scientist named Aerosol Rodor, who developed an artificial skin called pseudoderm, which would bond with a special energy gas. Sage used pseudoderm to create a mask, giving him a faceless appearance. Sage dubbed himself the Question and began to fight criminals in his hometown of Hub City, often employing brutal interrogation tactics like torture and leaving criminals in a precarious predicament to possibly die. This would wind up pushing the limits of the Comics Code Authority.
The reasons behind the Question's rather aggressive attitude towards criminals was because Steve Ditko was a devout follower of Ayn Rand's objectivist philosophy, or as most of you would know it, the philosophy of the Bioshock guy. Anyway, one of the main tenets of objectivism is the idea that there's no such thing as a moral gray zone. Stealing a loaf of bread to feed your family is just as bad as stealing $1 million. It's still stealing no matter what the motive behind it is. In fact, a lot of the characters Ditko created outside of Marvel Comics reflected his objectivist ideals. Characters like the Headcore Blue Beetle, Mr. A, the Creeper.
In 1983, the Charlton characters were acquired by DC Comics. DC would then fold the characters into the DC Universe with the Crisis on Infinite Earths event. This led to the Question getting his own 1987 relaunch series written by Dennis O'Neil.
Now, where Steve Ditko was a devout hardcore objectivist, Dennis O'Neil, whose most noteworthy comic book achievement was taking Green Arrow, who was a Batman/Robin Hood knockoff, and turning him into a liberal freedom fighter, was pretty much the exact opposite of that.
O'Neill's run on the Question focused more on fighting political corruption, with Hub City being the equivalent of East St. Louis, Illinois. O'Neill's work did have its followers, but many longtime fans felt betrayed by changing away from the objectivist philosophy, and this would often get referenced in the book's letter pages. You may also remember that the Question played a significant role in the Justice League Unlimited series. There, he was depicted as a conspiracy theorist who believed that corporations were controlling the populace with diet soda and boy bands. It turned out to be true, but let's face it, it's still kind of weird.
Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the Question's most enduring impact on comics would be the fact that Alan Moore used the character as the basis for the uber-violent vigilante Rorschach in his seminal work, Watchmen. In fact, this would actually be sort of parodied by Dennis O'Neil in his series, issue number 17, where the Question actually considers adopting a lot of Rorschach's tendencies after reading Watchmen, only for it to wind up blowing up in his face.
In 2005, DC Comics was planning some big things for the Question and tapped writer Rick Veitch and artist Tommy Lee Edwards to reposition Sage for this event.
Now, technically the story is called The Devil's in the Details, but most places just list it under The Question 2005, and it's what we're looking at today. So here it is, 2005's miniseries, The Question.
Vic Sage is in Chicago preparing to board a train to Metropolis. He's just concluded a major expose on the meatpacking industry. When discovering the cover-up, Sage met a mystically powered hitman named Psychopomp. Psychopomp confessed that he was hired by the Subterraneans, an underground crime organization based out of Metropolis. Intrigued, Sage set up an appointment to meet with Lois Lane and boarded the train. While Lois waited with Jimmy Olsen, Lois reflected on how she knew Sage in college. They worked together on the student newspaper, but they rarely talked, though Jimmy seemed to think the two were secretly a couple. Sage actually gives Lois the slip, though he does leave behind a message. Miffed, Lois and Jimmy move on to the next story. In this case, Lex Luthor's new building, the Metropolis Science Spire. Luthor is joined by the mayor of Metropolis and a mysterious woman as he explains the reasoning behind the building's construction. Luthor had discovered that Metropolis had one of the world's greatest concentrations and was one of the world's greatest generators of Ki, the mystical energy of life. To that end, Luthor consulted one of the leading feng shui masters, 6 True Words. The two wound up designing the Science Spire to collect and harness and put the Ki to good use.
Okay, 3 things. First, yes, I am pronouncing the word Ki correctly. It's Ki, not Chi. Second, 6 True Words sounds like a Native American name, and, well, Feng Shui is an Asian philosophy, so I'm kind of confused on that. And I'm also confused on where exactly in the DC continuity this takes place. See, around this time, Lex Luthor had just been ousted as President of the United States, and Well, he was on the run from the law, so I have no idea as to why Metropolis is letting a federal fugitive construct a building in its city.
Meanwhile, the Question began to pound the pavement and listen for information on the subterraneans. He finally managed to spot a group executing a terrorist attack by installing a large lens over Metropolis and focusing a solar energy beam. Really, it was just a cover-up to rob a bank. The beam was used to distract Superman. Just before they got away, the Question jumped them. The Question manages to take the group down when the robbers' bodies begin burning, though Sage did manage to grab one of their radios.
I should point out that in the Dennis O'Neil Question series, Vic Sage received martial arts training and training in several Eastern religious techniques from a man named Richard Dragon, and that the Question is actually utilizing the key of Metropolis to help track down the Subterraneans.
Meanwhile, the Subterraneans get a visit from Psychopomp. He wants in on their plans to take down Superman. The Question returns to pounding the pavement. He uses the key of Metropolis to detect several criminal dealings going on. This is taking place in Metropolis restrooms because the criminals know that even the Man of Steel will respect certain boundaries. The money used in some of the deals then gets flushed down to the Subterraneans. Sage breaks up one of the deals and flushes down a canister with a tracking device. Back at the Daily Planet, Lois Lane continues to lament Sage skipping out on their meeting as she interviews the mayor and 6 True Words. Lois is plainly skeptical about the feng shui, so the mayor shows Lois a special helmet that Luthor designed to demonstrate the power of Ki. Lois puts on the helmet, and all the buildings in Metropolis become aglow with energy. Lois is impressed, but still not a believer. Meanwhile, the Question continues breaking up various criminal dealings around Metropolis and flushing trackers along the way.
I should point out that the Subterraneans' headquarters is actually a large subway train which they use to covertly travel throughout all of Metropolis.
The Subterraneans are slowly getting hip to someone breaking up their deals, though they don't have any idea who's really behind it. Eventually, their leader named Minos decides to contact Psychopomp. They detail the importance as their employer doesn't like losing money.
Spoilers, they're employed by Lex Luthor.
Meanwhile, the Question breaks up another deal, this one involving black market organs. However, this has attracted somebody else's attention. Superman. Superman has been aware of Sage's activities in Metropolis, though he's unaware of Sage's identity. He doesn't approve of Sage's actions, pointing out that he has lieutenants throughout Metropolis to take care of the lesser criminals. Despite the Question's attempt to explain, the Man of Steel delivers a message. Dial it back, or leave Metropolis. Back with the Subterraneans, Psychopomp fills them in on how he bumped into the Question in Chicago. With that in mind, Minos has decided to begin the group's plan early. Meanwhile, there's a disturbance at the Science Spire. The construction has disturbed the spirits of several slaves killed in a hurricane in 1836. So 6 True Words begins performing an exorcism. This has also attracted the attention of the Question and the Subterraneans. Minos dispatches a small group after Sage. They jump the Question in a subway tunnel, and in the process of fighting the group off, Sage pushes 2 of them into the path of an oncoming train. One of the others takes a hostage and bumps into Psychopomp, who aids in their escape. Meanwhile, the Question arrives at the Science Spire, where he and 6 True Words notice each other's presence. Hours go by as Lois and Jimmy arrive to cover the exorcism. The Question looks on from afar. He's always harbored feelings for Lois, but he never worked up the courage to talk to her back in college. Instead, Lois says he just brought a lot of terrible poetry. Lois even remembers one where Sage called himself a face without a face. Sage then sneaks onto the construction site after 6 True Words passes out from exhaustion. She did manage to finish the exorcism, though, and to celebrate, the mayor takes her up to the 20th floor of the spire.
Q Akbar.
As the two put on the key detector, 6 True Words mentions that during the exorcism she received a psychic message from someone. It was the Question. And it turns out that Luthor's plan is to harness the key of Metropolis and use it as a weapon. The mayor confirms this and pushes 6 True Words off a ledge. As she falls to her death, 6 True Words uses her remaining key to signal the identity of her killer to the Question. Sage climbs onto a service elevator, however he's interrupted by Superman. The Man of Tomorrow is none too happy about the incident on the subway. Sage points out that it was in self-defense, and Superman probably would have done the same. Superman just tells Sage to leave Metropolis within 24 hours. Superman is then approached by Lois as he prepares to help out an attack in India. She knows of the death of 6 True Words, and she asks her husband if he can see Ki. Meanwhile, Minos and his crew get some last-minute advice from Psychopomp on the Question, as they prepare to make their move. The Question makes his final preparations by tapping into the key of the entire planet. The Question begins using his astral form to take out several initial attackers from Minos' forces. Sage then uses his physical form to commandeer several construction vehicles and use them on the Subterraneans. He then uses his astral form to coerce Minos into convincing his men that they should haul up in the explosive storage unit. You can guess how that turns out. As Minos lays dying, the Question reveals the truth. Psychopomp died back in Chicago. Vic used his key to masquerade as the hitman and to learn more about the Subterraneans. He then buries the criminals in concrete. The Question is then approached by the mayor, who has a gun pointed at him. Before he can finish rambling his evil plan, the Question teams up with the soul of 6 true words to knock out the mayor. Sage then tosses the mayor into the concrete as well. The next day, Vic Sage delivers his report on the Science Spider and the Subterraneans. He then reconnects with Superman and asks him to pass along an apology letter to Lois. Supes just tells him to get out.
And so ends 2005's The Question. How was it? Well, there are some aspects of the book I like. I really like the idea with the Subterraneans and a lot of their tactics. The long subway train that they can use to just sort of travel throughout Metropolis. Hiding from Superman by doing most of their dealings in the bathroom. I also like the idea of the Science Spider and utilizing Key as a weapon, and the fact the Question also sort of utilizes Key. I thought that was rather interestingly applied. Also, while I'm not a huge fan of the style of artwork, I do think this is a better use of it. The weird sort of photo-negative, chicken-scratchy artwork I think is pretty good here. It's not my favorite, but I think it's a better representation of that style. Unfortunately, that is really where the compliments end. This story is just so slowly paced. It just plods along. It's all of this, jump to Lois being skeptical, jump to the Question walking around the streets, jump to Lois being skeptical, jump to the Question walking around the streets. It just started to feel like a chore. I mean, it felt like a chore in the second issue, and that's not good. Also, this story is surprisingly lacking in substance. It's just kind of ultimately pointless. I mean, that's why this episode had such a long intro with the background of the Question. That's really the only interesting point to make in this, is the background of the Question. Nothing more. I mean, Superman adds nothing. Lois Lane adds nothing. Psychopomp adds nothing. And also, I did say that they were trying to position the Question to be used in later stories, which, most noteworthy in these 52 series, they did use him. But it doesn't seem to position him well to be used in those stories at all. It just feels like they wanted to tell a Question story. And so, I have to give the Question an F. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review.
Hey guys, want to recommend a book to be placed in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box? Well, check out my Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimeforcap productions, or just check the link in the description below and see how you can help make that happen.